right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our panel, Career-Connected Curriculum for Tomorrow's AR/VR Developers. Over the past year, we've had the pleasure of working with several forward-thinking educational institutions that not only want to bring immersive technologies into their classrooms, but also want to engage, support students to create those immersive experiences themselves. Our panelists today represent research, public high schools, and the VR industry. And they've come together to create one of the nation's very first career-connected curricula for VR development. Whether you're an educator, developer, small business owner, or student, our goal today is to inspire you to think about how we can bring more VR into the classroom and more creators into the industry. My name is Cindy Ball, and I lead the Oculus education programs at Facebook. We're honored to have these panelists with us today. I'd like to introduce them. Professor Eric Nersessian is an AR/VR researcher and professor at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. He develops emerging educational technology projects at the Mixer Lab and uses those projects to teach new AR/VR developers. Next, we have Harvey Wright. Harvey is from the Seattle Public Schools. He's a career educator and with a long-time focus on how to combine instructional practices with technology to improve educational outcomes. He's committed to creating relevant and authentic learning opportunities for all students to keep them engaged in school through high school and beyond. Thank you for being here, Harvey. And our final panelist, Justin Rogers, is a software engineer. He's been with Oculus for the past 3 years. And in addition to his day job, he is a mentor and advisor for several organizations that focus on students and early career engineers. Justin has also been working with Harvey on VR curriculum with the Seattle Public Schools. Justin, it's good to see you.
Thank you.
Before we jump into our discussion about this topic, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to give a short introduction to their work. We'll start with Eric.
Sure. So I'm Eric Nersessian. I've had about 10 years of industry experience in mostly serious applications of video games and virtual reality. Over that time, I've been adjuncting at my alma mater, NJIT. Eventually, about 3 years ago, they brought me back to develop their curriculum, their series of classes for virtual and augmented reality, and to start at that time it was the VR lab, now the Mixer lab. So that infusion of industry practices into the classes is just very important. And as you can see here, we're kind of working away on our VR projects. And this is actually a recent development out of our classroom in our lab called C'Spresso. It's a computer science educational app in both a virtual reality form in Quest and a book-based augmented reality form. And this really culminates in what I think is important here is that my undergraduate students who are trying to become augmented and virtual reality designers and developers need professional projects, they need great portfolio pieces, and they need to express themselves in the medium as strong as they can. And why not do that with educational apps for the next generation, the high schoolers who are trying to be virtual reality and augmented reality developers as well?
Thank you. Next, Harvey.
This work for me began a little over a year ago. It was born out of some conversations that we had with Oculus, trying to kind of decide how VR could positively impact education. And we identified 2 different projects, one being instructional use of VR to try and improve learning outcomes, and the other being a career-connected learning CTE, or career technical education curriculum that was designed to support students who want to pursue careers in VR. Last year at OC5, I had an opportunity to connect with Eric, and in our conversations, we realized that I was trying to create essentially a pathway that would allow students to begin learning about VR and then eventually move into post-secondary programs such as his. And so it made a lot of sense for us to begin to try and align our programs. Then after that, I connected with Justin, and he kind of became the industry voice for us as we tried to make decisions about the curriculum that we wanted to use. So I think kind of today we have our three kind of key stakeholders, post-secondary, the secondary programs, and industry. And our sort of challenge is to try and decide how we can best align this work. Also making sure that we maintain our focus on historically underserved students, particularly students of color, and we're working to build diversity into our programs. And then lastly, we kind of need to solve for the challenge of how we're going to bring the necessary technical expertise into the classroom so that we can actually teach the things that we want to teach in terms of VR and AR.
Thank you. And Justin?
Thanks. So my most interesting project is working with Harvey as a VR curriculum advisor for the Seattle Public School System. We met earlier in the year and we realized that anchoring the curriculum to what I do every day as a VR engineer would be extremely important to increasing the confidence that the program can create engineers in the future that can join the VR industry. From that point, I worked with some students and teachers to look at the existing computer science program and identify what were the gaps that it would take to fill in order to go from a computer science background into a more of a VR program. Over the summer, that has been developed into a curriculum, and over the next year, we'll be auditing that program to make sure that we haven't missed anything, and those students hopefully will have the confidence and passion for VR and realize that this is an industry they can move into. That will let them kind of jump into a program like Eric's, and then eventually, 3 or 4 years from now, they'll interview with me and join the VR industry as full engineers. That kind of builds our pipeline, but we also need to increase the funnel. And so some other areas that I work on, for the past 3 years, I've worked on Oculus Browser and WebXR. So we're hoping that we can create a more inclusive programming platform and content creation platform that brings more diverse individuals in and makes it easier to develop for VR. I'm hoping over the next 2 to 3 years, we can start to incorporate that into the curriculums. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. So one of the points you just mentioned was that creating that pipeline is sort of the glue between high school into post-secondary. And so I wonder if you could each, Harvey and Eric, talk a little bit about how you've both designed your curriculum to address your specific audiences and how you're thinking about tying them together.
I'll start because I'm the first part of this pipeline.
Sure.
Our goal has always been this idea that we were going to create a kind of VR pathway for students who are interested in this type of career, and that we could move them through a sequence of courses that were aligned, that gave them exposure, aligned with sort of Unity certification as well, so they could be mastering the skills and concepts they need. We would have them go through a preparatory and exploratory course and then into a projects class that could be interdisciplinary, and kind of at the end of this type of educational pathway, they would be ready to enter into a post-secondary program such as the one that Eric's built and created at his program.
Yeah, for me, that makes sense at the freshman and the sophomore levels. Those students are still at that level, that high school level, that we're still trying to baseline them out. We're trying to get them aware of what the careers are like, what type of skill sets they really need to be honing these next 4 years. And then as we move into that junior and senior level, we really need to shift gears on them. We really need to make them aware that this isn't playtime anymore. This school time will come to an end soon, and you have a few years left, so let's really kind of kick it into project-oriented classes, skill-based training, get those internships into the summer. We've actually been really successful with these kind of capstone or intern for credit classes during the fall and spring semester, where it's almost like companies get to try out these students. It's a low cost, low resource intensive way for them to see if they want to use these students full time during the summer, where hopefully as they're getting through their senior year, we've prepped them well enough and they've had their networking opportunities, and these companies wish to take them on full time.
Thank you. I think that both of your schools already had computer science curricula in place. And so as you're thinking about adding on another curriculum into your schools to more specifically address immersive technologies, how are you also thinking about the marriage between the CS curriculum and these new lessons?
I think we're trying to root this in some fundamental skills that are applicable in any type of CS class, so some of the logic, other types of thinking. And I also feel like we're at a place where some of this is just exposure. I don't feel like we are necessarily have the expectation that students are going to be, ready for industry right away. I mean, that may apply to some segment, but really what we're trying to do is generate interest and engagement and allow students to explore a variety of CS opportunities. So, and as I mentioned, our hope is kind of a capstone similar to what Eric described, where students might pursue a more traditional programming route. Other students might be more interested in something like immersive video, 360 video, or doing other kinds of VR, maybe just really focused on Unity. And they could then kind of meet again in a projects class where they have that opportunity to combine their respective talents and interests and create something new, some kind of new product as a result. So we see it as kind of by design aligned.
Right.
So that's interesting too, where this field's so new, and we're just, not only is the industry experimenting with what's best, but we're experimenting. And so we have all these traditional classes. We have computer science classes. We have digital design classes, or user experience classes. And we also have to pull in, actually now with virtual reality, we're tapping into industrial design practices as well. How do these bases are already secured, where you have our schools and teaching staff and the curriculum established, how can we kind of sew them together and form them into this kind of new knowledge base? And these teachers have been kind of vetted in their areas. And the way I've seen over these last few years anyways, as I come in, I'm trying to tie them together, find their best practices, or make them aware that we're pulling some of your knowledge in, but we're kind of gonna have to morph it into something new, into what this new field is. And so we have a lot of great talent and already established teaching practices at the university, and we're kind of in this experimental mixing the pot mode with these classes. And we've learned a lot over these last 3 years, and the curriculum has really blossomed from that.
I think to your point about the teacher training, we're seeing that as a critical piece, whether you're bringing VR into a classroom or now you're starting to generate new criteria. I know that just from computer science in general, teacher training is a major challenge. There certainly are some organizations that maybe Justin, you can speak to. Some of the organizations are already helping with computer science teacher training and are looking at VR training as well. The TEALS group, I think you've been working with the TEALS organization.
I haven't worked with it.
I can.
Oh, you
I got
speaking
this
with?
one.
Oh, maybe. Sorry, Harvey's been talking to TEALS. Sorry.
So I think you bring up a really important point. I mean, the idea of promoting CS education for students isn't new. That's something that has been a challenge all across the country for a long time, and now we're introducing new technologies and adding to that challenge. So I think how we're going to solve for the need for that subject matter expertise in the classroom is really critical to this. I think in part what we're going to have to do is change pedagogy a bit. So that's definitely an area for programs that are thinking about how are we going to lift up either CS programs or VR programs, shifting the learning, creating learning communities in the classroom, having your teachers learn how to follow more of a coaching model, and then working with industry partners. One that we've worked with in the past that's around the country is called TEALS. And we've had conversations with them about bringing in immersive reality people with those kinds of backgrounds, so that students who want to do this work, it's really, really hard to find teachers who are qualified and have the skills necessary. If they have that, a lot of times they recognize that, I can be better paid and work in industry to do this, so getting them to leave industry to come into the classroom is a big challenge. But if the emphasis is really just on providing students subject matter expertise in that moment when they need it the most, and the teacher is really there as kind of a coach, helping students with kind of identifying how they learn and what it means to kind of structure their learning, and then when they need it in a project, reaching out and having access to the real expert who's in the industry. That's essentially what TEALS do, but those are the kinds of models that I think we're going to need to really grow this work in education. I think it's going to be critical.
Yeah.
And that is a space where I've engaged as well, which is reaching out to institutions and figuring out how can I best apply my expertise, how can I help them either via mentoring, via interview training is one that I've done before, and then also looking at hackathons and things like that. There's many, many ways to engage the students. and to give them an additional bit of industry experience as an industry professional. And working with the teachers is one way to do it, but also just working directly with the students is a very positive way to do it.
Yeah. So I think when I got involved with your process for starting to develop curriculum, I was not that familiar with the nuts and bolts of what a school district goes through to actually introduce a new curriculum. And so, Harvey, could you share a little bit of like what does that cycle look like for a school district?
Yeah.
High level.
Sure. I mean, the secret is you always begin by calling it a pilot so that you can bypass a lot of the restrictions that you would otherwise face. But recognizing that we've kind of been doing that, we have some teachers who Eric trained this summer who have already sort of begun introducing some of the VR concepts into their projects classes. So that we already have a scheduled class called CS Projects, and it's the place where students can be a little more creative. There's more opportunities for students' voice and choice within that class. But our goal is really to move to formal classes that we want to be able to offer. So within career technical education, that always starts with the creation of a framework. We've been working with Unity Education to actually build out and flesh out a framework. And then also we've been working on building out the actual curriculum itself. We'll need to have this course initially added to our course catalog at the end of October. That's our timeline in Seattle. And then by January, that will go to our state OSPI, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we'll be able to get this course formally approved so that students can take a VR course starting next fall within Seattle. So that's kind of the pathway that we're following. Our goal, particularly in working with Unity Education, and our goal that Eric and I have had all along, is that our intent is to release this entire curriculum and the frameworks as an open educational resource so that anybody else who's interested in picking up this work and maybe launching programs that are similar can simply build off of the work that we've already done. With the understanding and sort of the expectation that once you have it and you're focused on the fundamentals, then you can, of course, adapt this so that you can better serve your respective student communities and meet their needs and really engage them in the work.
Let's have a quick note with that. You were talking a lot about these teachers already being trained and vetted in their ways and how to introduce into this new curriculum, and you're talking about these pilot programs. And I think that's one important area that we kind of discovered this summer is that we had a lot of computer science teachers, and even within there, some of them were focused on web development, some of them might have been databases, some of them might have been theory and just algorithms. And then you have teachers in design, and you have teachers in cinematography and 360 video, and so we approach the students where we have these all different baselines, and how do we teach them at the same level? We're doing the same thing with the teachers. How do we baseline them out? We have this new industry, this new workflows, this new knowledge. And how do we get these teachers at the high school level, at the college level, prepped and ready to be effective with the students?
I think, again, I'll go, we're going to have to shift pedagogy. I just 100% believe that. And I also believe that's in the interest of students. I mean, by changing this model towards learning partnerships, it's how we're going to also tackle for the equity challenges that we have. The opportunities to engage students more directly in their interests, allow them more choice and discretion, and support them in pursuing the things that they care about or are passionate about. I think that's going to be critical. And it aligns with some of the work that we're doing around culturally relevant teaching. I think the pedagogy shift is going to be key in this work. I don't think we're going to get there as quickly as we need to get there if we just focus on the idea that we're going to train a cohort of teachers who are all subject matter experts. And I frankly don't think that's a model that serves students well.
And I think from an industry perspective, we're moving so fast that even if you train them, by the time you've trained them, what they know is already out of date. Yeah. So being able to find ways that we can bring in people from industry to be able to provide and back up that, like literally things that are happening in the future right now is what I'm working on. And so how can I express that? How could I train somebody on that when it doesn't exist yet?
Yeah. It's critical.
As I'm creating it.
It's critical.
An iterative, flexible training cycle.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to like, where are our teachers being trained, and how do you get way in front of that cycle and keep that cycle changing as industry is evolving as well? I wanted to go back and touch on the certification. You mentioned possible certification. So Harvey is working with Unity, and Unity is developing a certification for high school level VR certification. And so I'm wondering, how do you guys think about the value of certifications, their role in moving from high school to college into the work cycle? How do you think about certifications?
You know, in career technical education, the idea of an industry recognized credential has always been really kind of a gold standard that you want to be targeting. You want to be able to say that students have accomplished a certain, they've arrived at a certain level of understanding that can be recognized kind of by everyone, that they have a certain skill level and they're ready to accomplish certain things, whatever they may be. You know, the work that we're kind of doing with Unity Education, one of the challenges, though, that we don't like, frankly, about industry recognized credentials is often there's a fee associated with them, and it can be substantial. And, you know, it might not surprise you to know that the students who can afford those industry recognized credential costs are the same students who typically become developers right now, and that's why the field lacks the diversity that it does. So for us, we've always wanted to be able to remove that kind of barrier for recognition of what skill set you have. But Unity has kind of worked with us to offer a credential that would be available to high school students without a cost. So that's huge news for us in terms of trying to engage students and make them feel like they can be successful. And there aren't these kinds of costs that would hold them back from being successful and having recognition of what they've done or accomplished.
Yep, great.
I'll say that the interesting uses I've found with certification is that, and yeah, we've worked with Unity a lot as well, is that they have a lot of resources and people out figuring out what the skills are, what the knowledge bases are. They're out talking to all the industry people. Their outreach is a lot stronger than one person, one professor, or one university or one high school. So I use them a lot as a reference point to make sure, or a sanity check, to make sure that what I'm doing and what I'm teaching is actually aligned with what their certifications are. Because if they're spending all that time figuring it out, I know that I can follow along and I know I'm in the right path. And then it's really useful when they have projects or learning paths or tutorials to at least double check just to make sure that we're guiding the students in the right direction, that we think that these larger organizations have already done the groundwork for us.
Yeah, great. I wanted to come back to you, Eric, on your project with the marriage between your undergraduates and your graduate students and that cycle of developing and teaching. And if you could talk more about like how what impact have you seen so far through your C-Spresso program?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So that was one, a large educational software development that came out of the lab. Over these last 3 years, as we've been developing the curriculum for AR and VR, you know, we focus on the core points. So programming skill sets, our design skill sets. But then we have a big research lab with like 4 faculty involved there. And then the students start to learn. We have classes too where it's about undergraduate research projects. So now we have this new area of like data analytics and trying to scope out problems and what are users' issues. And it just actually brings in the full cycle of development. Just like maybe in industry, you go out and do your market research, your customer research, and then you do your user research. And as you're cycling through your development, we actually started doing that in-house in our own labs because we have our research lab right next to our teaching lab, which is right next to our little community space where the students hang out on their projects. So the closeness of the space has just been tied together where our classes bleed into our research projects, bleed into our hangout time. And we just had a great synergy, a great collaboration with our design and our development school. All our students came together, and we had our researchers figuring out some cool educational goals. We had designers going out and physically prototyping what it would be like in VR, like taking cardboard cutouts and seeing what levers would feel like, saying, this is good, this works, let's go through some UX flows. We have students already trained there, going into making the 3D models and the programmers coming together, and it's just like having a full little production studio, and it's been a great success this last year.
Great. What is your plan for C-Spresso going forward?
I don't know. We built it successfully at the Educational Summit, which was at day 0. We had a great send-off, a lot of people at the demo stations. They loved it. I don't think it would have been that successful if we didn't really put all that polish and that aesthetics into it. It's like this beautiful little children's books. I don't know if Jess is out there, but you know, kudos to you. I would love to continue developing it. Like in lab, we have our ideas for our next levels. We're going to go into sorting algorithms. So we built it for the Quest, where it's purposely meant to be a lot of motion, a lot of physical movement, a lot of body kinesthetics. Like, can we get muscle memory going with all these abstract notions of binary math, pulling levers and what have you? And now we thought, oh, sorting algorithms, perfect, bubble sort. It would really go well in virtual reality. We're going to keep growing it in the lab, and we'll see where it goes. And we've actually, some of the teachers yesterday wanted it in their classroom already. They wanted to know when they could try it out. So that was a huge inspiration, and they got us thinking about putting it on the Rift, because they don't have a lot of Quests, but a lot of school systems are starting to get a lot of Rifts for their own high school VR development classes. And so if I could just, I'll move everything closer. It's in a 20 by 20 foot space, so got to move it in for the Rift. But now we have Quest and Rifts kits for the schools.
Great. I wish you all the luck with that. It's a very cool application if you ever had a chance to see the demo. So we've touched a little bit on diversity earlier in the panel. And I think there are multiple ways to look at diversity. It's diversity of students. It's diversity of voices, creating applications. It comes into a lot of different areas. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we can increase sort of diversity across this whole ecosystem, from the students to the applications, to what's being represented in the educational materials, letting people even know these opportunities exist. For many communities, they don't. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it's critical. I think it's, especially being in the public education sector that I am, K-12, like this is our work, closing equity gaps and supporting educational justice is really critical to what we're trying to accomplish. And, I think about this industry a bit, and I imagine myself living in this broadly pluralistic society made up of people of different backgrounds and different histories and different beliefs. And then I imagine a small, fairly privileged and fairly homogenous group of people designing all of the immersive worlds that those people get to experience, and it sounds deeply dystopian. So I really think that it is absolutely essential to what we do, and I think the way we do it, one, we have to reach out and engage directly with those different communities that are out there, and we have to support opportunities for them to have a voice and to participate and to create projects that are meaningful and relevant and authentic in their own lives. So giving them the tools that they need to be able to do that, I think having people who work in industry participate in those communities. So we want developers like Justin to be in our schools and others to come into the programs where we're trying to teach this. But we also want to find developers who reflect and are members of those communities where we're trying to teach this work, because it does have a huge impact on student learners when they look around and they recognize somebody who looks similar to them, who acts similar to them, who shares some of their understanding or their background, who is engaged in doing this work. It changes the vicinity of this. It makes it attainable. It makes it something that they can themselves achieve. So it's critical that diversity is part of our work and what we do. And it needs to be that we're moving them through the K-12 pipeline, and it is the broad enough funnel that Justin described, so that they are going to programs like Eric's, and then that cycles into where they are getting hired at Oculus and other companies, and then they're coming back into the classroom as the subject matter experts, and they're promoting the next generation and broadening that funnel even more.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we've created a platform that is not easy to use yet, and it's not very accessible. And I think we see that as we develop the curriculums and we realize how difficult it is to make the machines accessible, make the hardware accessible. And so I think ease of use is going to be critical to diversity, bringing the cost down, increasing the access. And so I think it's on us as platform developers in the industry, as the creators of the tools, to make them accessible to everybody. Just thinking through the process of somebody who wants to be a 360 creator. Today they might have to go buy very expensive camera equipment, a very expensive machine to encode and transcode that video, and just thinking of ways that we can bring those costs down and make those more accessible is going to be a great way to figure out how we build curriculum that is more broadly accessible and brings in a more diverse population.
I also think, Justin, some of the work that you're doing, and maybe you've referenced this already, around more accessible platforms for development. Would you like to speak to your WebVR work?
Yeah, so WebXR is something that we've been WebVR is something that we've been working on for about 3 years. 3 years ago I joined and we started building Oculus Browser, pushing the WebVR specifications so that you could develop WebVR applications or VR applications using JavaScript, and deployed via the web. That was great for phones and PCs and everything else. It worked on Rifts, and then when Go came out, it worked on Go. When Quest came out, it works really well on Quest. It works basically across the board. It's one of the most accessible kind of technologies for building VR now. And a really cool milestone happened this year is that WebXR 1.0 was moved to an editor's draft. And what that means is all major browsers are able to implement the specification now. So by the end of this year, hopefully, all major browsers will have shipped an implementation, which means anybody with access to any computing device that has a browser on it will actually be able to program VR. They may not have a headset, but they'll at least be able to program against the VR APIs and create VR experiences. So I think that'll be really compelling.
Great. And we've also we've had conversations a lot at Seattle, but a lot of the students who maybe are initially being drawn into the immersive technology development classes are those who are also interested in computer science. But with AR and VR being very much like the game industry, it takes a village to create an application, from storytellers to artists to project managers. You need people with all skills coming together to produce these experiences. And so how can we implement something like that in the schools? It might be easier at the university level, but how do you think about bringing together that diversity of skills to build these experiences?
I really think, I'll go back to that idea of that student voice and student choice, and, some of this and the driver and even what we heard today, it's really rooted in stories. So having students recognize that they have powerful stories to tell, and then supporting them with tools and helping them recognize kind of as a community that they have ownership in this, and that typically there's different people who have different skill sets who are part of that storytelling. It is about kind of cross-collaborating. Obviously this needs to be scaffolded and supported, and we need to make sure that they have access to platforms that allow them to communicate. But I think that threshold to entry is a lot lower. And we also, like I said, have to rethink some of our understandings of pedagogy and how we collaborate and how we allow for things like rich mentorships where people can come in who have done this work or who are familiar with kind of the art of storytelling, and helping students identify that they all have unique talents and strengths, and that they can come together across disciplines and participate in the creation of something like this, because we just don't know. Frankly, they're in high school. I think we're just trying to give them exposure. It's not about the technology, frankly. Like, the technology is going to change, we know that. It's really about helping empower them to feel like they have ownership in this, and ownership in their understanding, and ownership in their own education and where they want to go with that. And that's what will make the difference in terms of how we really truly cross-pollinate and build diversity of ability and diversity of kind of representation.
Great. Yeah, it's challenging with schools because you have like set classes everyone needs to take, and you need, there's a lot of extra coordination.
The schedule of the day changes, and we're trying to figure out, there's definitely some innovative thinking about how students, what kinds of opportunities would be credit-bearing opportunities, and that's where that might come from. So, there's a lot of things that students might do after school. Robotics clubs are pretty common. Those aren't necessarily credit-bearing, but why not? They're learning engineering skills, they're learning things that are highly applicable and clearly of value. So why aren't those credit-bearing opportunities? Right. So I think people are more ready to have those kinds of conversations, particularly as we recognize how the system that we currently have lags the need of industry and lags the pace of innovation and technical change. So I think that thinking is starting to shift. It clearly needs to continue.
Yeah. You guys are doing some great work in that direction.
Thanks.
So the goal of this talk was to kind of think again about that pipeline. So I wonder if you want to spend a few minutes thinking about the challenges and the opportunities that we have working together, and sort of where do you hope that this conversation and relationship will go?
Well, on my end, the last year's has been exactly what I wanted. We met a year ago at OC5, and just through a series of coincidences on my relationships with our local high schools, we did a grant with the New Jersey Department of Education, and we got funding to do this senior level AR/VR development class, and roped in with Harvey, and then we met all his Seattle teachers, and it was a great time this summer. I've never had an experience like it, and I'm sure it'll continue, and especially since we went over that first hump, and we now have like produced results. I think it'll be easier to grow this idea. We'd like to see other states, other teachers involved. From my perspective, the two of them have been collaborating a lot. Obviously, they're very local together, so I would like to see how I could start connecting up with industry. I'm always pushing into New York City, which is local for me, and trying to build those relationships. But there's like a lot of smaller companies. You have to kind of work your way through HR and down into the dev teams or whatever. It's a lot of effort, and it'd be nice to have maybe someone on our side coordinate it, or yes, work with a larger organization where somebody actually has some more resources, or they're more pushed into building these initiatives so that the pipeline could, on our side, get built a lot stronger.
I'd say we actually have quite a few people who are interested, in my site in education and getting involved. And so it's been a matter of letting them know that these possibilities exist, creating the opportunities. So earlier we were talking about how we bring more diversity into the program itself and kind of get the art students and the design students interacting at, say, a high school level. That's kind of an inclusivity, and we have to create that environment for it. An industry professional is just another person in that room who has to feel that they're included and feel that there's an opportunity for them to be there. And I just know so many people who are willing to give that time and give that effort because they really, really believe in building this pipeline, and they really believe in, the future is kids, and the future is students, and the future is, us being able to bring these people into the industry and make them effective.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the work over the past year has been bringing the key stakeholders to the table and making sure that we're kind of all aligned. And the goal, not trying to replicate and create redundant efforts, but really be smart about how we're allocating our resources and our time. And again, making sure that the right people are part of the conversation so that we can continue to build on this work. I think that that's key. And then moving forward, as we kind of move towards a curriculum launch and launching these courses, it's about how we're going to make sure that we are able to stay aligned in this work and be able to stay engaged, and also be that kind of open community so that everyone who is interested in participating in this work can also be engaged and participate and add your voice and add your input and be a stakeholder for your community or what you represent, and just kind of continue to grow the dialogue and grow the shifts that we need to make so that this can be something that is sustainable and functional and continues to grow and iterate.
So I guess if there are folks in the audience maybe who are thinking about, I might be interested in starting something like this in my community, what are the starting points? What advice do you have about how to get started?
Reach out. So you're meeting like-minded people right now. Go to conferences, start networking, but we're all available online. We have the Facebook Oculus Education Group, which is, go join that, because that's growing and everyone's talking on there for all these ideas. My website's listed on this, I think, at some point, and you can definitely reach out, take a look at where our current curriculum is at, and if you wish to add to it or make a wiki and you start growing it, it's going to have to be an organic grassroots process, and I know that people will join in and figure out the best ways to do that.
I think I'm also thinking about, like, Harvey, from your perspective, it was probably a year ago before, this was just like a seed of an idea. And so what are some of the strategies you use with your school district to move this forward too?
I definitely feel like, obviously there has to be an interest and a willingness to recognize that, typically career technical education, it's about identifying high wage, high demand work, and that's kind of how you sell it to people that, hey, this is an area we need to be developing and we need to be focused educationally on serving our students in this particular area. But I kind of do feel like in terms of where you want to invest or allocate right now, apart from generating interest, to be ready in terms of picking up programs or launching. I wouldn't try and build curriculum. I mean, we're kind of doing that, and the goal is to share it. I think it's really about investing in the pedagogy shifts that you need to make in your classrooms and with your teachers, making sure that they are ready and focused on equity and supporting all students in their classrooms, creating opportunities for student voice and choice, and ready to allow this idea of these learning partnerships where they may not be the subject matter expert. And that's really challenging for teachers because typically that's not how any of us learned. We were used to somebody standing in front of us who knew all and shared all, and we just were kind of passive recipients. And guess what? That didn't work for or a significant amount of people, and typically people who are people of color. So that's one of the things that we need to change and shift so that we can be ready to actually teach the content and the curriculum they want in terms of the technology.
Well, thank you. We are running a little bit lower on time now, but I wanted to give each of you an opportunity if you have a final thought you'd like to leave us with. Eric?
Sure. I could say firsthand, coming from industry and building up classes and curriculum, that everything I took with me and learned over these last 10 or 15 years I brought into the classroom, and that's exactly what it was supposed to be for this field, and it worked out really well. But there's only so much I can do, and obviously the longer that I'm in academia, the more I need support from industry to see what's really vital and how it's changing. So any type of support, talk, just advice, any projects, any type of review of student work from the industry, developers and designers is greatly beneficial.
Thank you.
To me, it's just, if there's anything that has come of this or I've learned, it's that we're clearly better together, that our opportunity to align this work and to find the right stakeholders and partners and give them the opportunity to collaborate and participate, that's why we're here, that's why we've gotten as far as we've gotten, and that's what it is going to allow us to continue and go further. So it's just critical.
Yeah, as an industry, we really do have to push on this developer pipeline, and so my challenge is be engaged. Don't wait for the pipeline to happen. Don't just accept the engineers that are coming your way, but instead influence this curriculum, because if the curriculum is developing the developers and engineers that we want, then we can hire them directly out of these classes. And that's very important for us to be able to increase our scale and create more content and create more things. So be engaged, mentor, work with students, work with these faculty, advise the curriculum.
Ask me how.
Ask him how.
Talk to these guys. Okay, well, we are at time. I want to thank our panelists so much for everything you've contributed today. These gentlemen will be sticking around this room for our next panel, and they will be joining the speaker pavilion room for more conversations at 3:15 today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.